My name is Ashley Abruzzo, and I am the Membership Development Manager for the Germanna Foundation. And I actually just began with the foundation back in February. I am a descendant. What descendant? I will address that later on in the presentation, kind of keep you in suspense. But I've been with the foundation since February, and I'm still learning a lot, but I'm excited to introduce you to what exactly Germanna is, how we got started, and what our present-day mission is. Well, in order to give you a great overview of Germanna and what it stands for, we're going to have to do a little bit of historical context, kind of show you what was going on around the world at this time. So we begin in England. Queen Anne of Great Britain is currently in reign from 1702 to 1714. We begin in the early 1700s. In 1708 and 1709, she encourages several German citizens along the Rhine River to travel to London and then travel over to America to receive land. Early Virginia planters such as Robert King Carter and William Byrd were very interested in mining in Virginia. That includes lead, copper, iron ore, and silver. A gentleman named Baron de Graffenried actually was in North Carolina at this time, and he was doing a mining operation in New Bern, North Carolina. Now eventually he will meet up with Alexander Spotswood and discuss mining operations in Virginia. Now you might also wonder, where did Germanna come from, the word? It comes from Queen Anne of Great Britain, as well as the German colonists that came over to Virginia. If you're familiar with the Rappahannock River, that was originally named the Rapdian River. So that's where Queen Anne also makes her name known. Now by 1711, miners are being recruited from Siegen in Germany, and they are actually a center hub for the iron industry. Now they've been mining iron and smelting since the early Celtic years, and many mines were actually dotted along the hillside. And each village managed its forest land in an 18-year rotation, and they produced wood to make the charcoal. And firebacks and iron plates and stoves were among the products that were created in these local forges. And the villages around Siegen that sent settlers to Virginia included Truppach, Oberfischbach, Obersheldon, Eisenberg, Freudenberg, and a couple others which I cannot pronounce, and I'm afraid if I tried to, I would butcher those words. Here we have a gentleman that I'm sure many of us are familiar with. We have Alexander Spotswood. He was born in 1676 in Tangier, Morocco. His father was a British Army surgeon, and by 1693, Spotswood was a part of the British Army under the Duke of Marlborough, and he actually established the rank of lieutenant colonel. Now by 1710, Spotswood is made Lieutenant Governor of Virginia, and he had a big hand in developing many buildings in Williamsburg, such as the Governor's Palace, the Old Powder Magazine, and Bruton Parish Church. Now he had a strong sense of British imperial power, but also had a strong personal drive for wealth and power. And by 1714, the first group of colonists were heading over to Virginia. So this played into the hands of Spotswood to bring more power and wealth to the area. So here we have the introduction of the first colony to Virginia. The story goes that originally the 42 men, women, and children were supposed to get their passage paid by Baron de Graffenried. Well, he was unaware that he was supposed to pay their fare overseas. So long story short, a bit of confusion ensues. So what did they do? They pulled their own money together and they indentured themselves for 4 years. So they entered into indentured servitude on their own. They actually paid their way from Germany to London, and so by this point they really had no other choice, and so they became indentured servants for 4 years. So we have 42 men, women, and children arriving in Virginia in the spring of 1714. And Spotswood by this point had convinced the colonial legislature to appropriate funds to build a frontier fort against the French and their Indian allies. And he had it patented in an area where he believed there were to be iron and silver. And by the time Germanna was established in 1714, they were the westernmost English civilization on the East Coast. So if you think of Jamestown, they're very, very far east. Here we have Germanna, very far west. And within this fort, we know that they had a blockhouse. And at this blockhouse, they would have services. And this is where the very first German Reformed congregation was established in Virginia. Here are a list of the different names associated with the 1714 colonies. We have Albrecht, Brombach, Fischbach, Kuntz, Reinschmidt, Fischbach, Heimbach, Friesenhagen, Hitt, Otterbach, Huffman, Holtzclaw, Otterbach, Kemper, Martin, Rector, Fischbach again, Spielman, Weaver, and Huttman. So along with these 42 men, women, and children, the first 2 years they were at Germanna, they did not do any mining. They actually were there to clear the land and begin farming it. So for those first 2 years, they were very frustrated. They were sent there to do mining, and they weren't doing the task at hand that they were originally asked to do. So we only have one description of what Fort Germanna would have looked like. This is taken from the diary of a man named John Fontaine in November of 1715 when he came to visit the site. He said, "This place is paled in, is a pentagon, very regularly laid out, and in the very center is a blockhouse, made with 5 sides. They make use of the blockhouse for divine service." And as we walked about the town, it's palisaded with stakes stuck in the ground, and they have 9 houses built all in a line. And for every house about 20 feet distant from it, they have small sheds built for their hogs and for their hens, so that the hog sties and houses make a street. The Germans live very miserably. So this was from John Fontaine, who will later have a hand in 1716. This is what we believe the fort to look like. This is a conjectured image. Because that's the only description we had of the fort, for all we know, the 9 houses that were laid out could be on either side of the fort. And as I'll talk about in just a little bit, we have ongoing archaeology about Fort Germanna going on right now. So we have Find the Fort on social media, and hopefully one day in the very near future we can make that announcement that we did in fact find it. So by 1716, John Fontaine comes back to Germanna, and at this point Spotswood is deciding he wants to do an expedition over to the Blue Ridge and the Shenandoah Valley. He is still really concerned that there are French out there, and not knowing that they're actually further north, he wants to go out there and make sure that they're not in a territory that he wants to purchase, in addition to about the 85 or so thousand acres of land that he had before coming over here to Virginia. So it was an expedition led by Spotswood that included about 50 different people, servants, Native Americans, and rangers. Now, John Fontaine was actually the journalist for this expedition, and he was also an officer in the British Army. And with the exception of John Fontaine's personal diary, there are no other accounts of this expedition. So I did not grow up in Virginia. I am from Illinois. I had not heard of this expedition until I got involved with Germanna. So my understanding is there is some myth and some lore onto what exactly happened. But what we do know is they did travel to the Blue Ridge and the Shenandoah Valley, and this trip was only about 10 days long. So we round back to the reason the first colony came over, mining in Virginia. Well, finally, by 1716, they began mining for silver. However, that all changed. By 1718, they started searching for iron ore. And by the time their indentured servitude was over in the 1719 time period, Spotswood still really didn't have much to show for his search. And by 1722, Spotswood was replaced as governor, but continued to be a private citizen. And he would actually have several furnaces constructed in 1732, some near the Germanna area, as well as in the Massaponax vicinity. So where did the first colony go after their indentured servitude was over with? Well, they will actually head north to the Northern Neck area. They will negotiate with Robert Carter, the agent for Lord Fairfax, who had thousands of acres of land in the Northern Neck area. By 1720, 1,800 acres were actually established for them, and the town called Germantown was created. And you'll see on the far left, that is how their land patent was set up. A portion was set aside for their pastor, and each family received its land in a strip along Licking Run. And a lot of the Germantown settlers actually encouraged their male relatives back over in Germany to come over to the area. And so by the 1730s, a lot of these relatives will be living in the Little Fork area in northern Culpeper County. If you know where Crockett Park is in Fauquier County, there is a man-made lake. Underneath that man-made lake is a majority of those land patents. So if you were to go there today, you wouldn't see a whole lot. There is, I think, 1 or 2 homesteads still there. I believe a Martin homestead is still there, but unfortunately the majority of that is underwater. So any archaeology over in that vicinity unfortunately would not be doable. So time to introduce the 1717 Second Germanna Colony. Now their story is a little bit different than the first colony. So they were originally supposed to go to Pennsylvania. What happens is this: they arrive in London. There is a captain named Andrew Tarbot who has a ship called the Scott. He plans on taking them to Pennsylvania. However, he was a gambler and he was put into debtor's prison for a little while. At this time, we still have several of these German immigrants in London, and they wait and they wait and they wait. Their travel funds begin to get depleted. They join a German Lutheran church. They have children that are baptized at this time. Well, by the time Tarbot is out of jail, these immigrants no longer have the money to really bring themselves over. However, Tarbot knows that in Virginia, Spotswood could use more German immigrants for more work. So instead of taking them to Pennsylvania, he hijacks them to Virginia. That is how the story goes. It is not the most pleasant story, but we know 80-odd Germans from the, and I'm going to pronounce it incorrectly, Württemberg, Baden, and Palatinate agree with Captain Tarbot in London to bring them over to Pennsylvania. Essentially, William Penn is in Pennsylvania advertising this lush farmland. He's painting a rosy picture for them. Well, these immigrants have a different background than those from Siegen. These men are winemakers, they are craftsmen, they are farmers. They have this idea in their mind that they're going to have a nice, lush lifestyle in Pennsylvania. So when they get to Virginia, that completely changes. They would actually settle their area west of the Rappahannock River. They may have been in the fort for a brief period of time, but after that, especially by 1720, when the first colony is no longer there, Spotswood will take the fort down, and he will create his own home entitled, by someone else, the Enchanted Castle. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But interestingly enough, at the end of their indentured servitude in 1724, 1725, Spotswood decides that he's going to sue some of these colonists. We don't know why. We don't know why. We don't know if they didn't pay off their servitude. We don't know if there was other reasons behind it. It's a little bit of history's mysteries. So not to get you overwhelmed, here's part 1 of the second colony families. I won't read them all, but you can see Amberger, Blankenbaker, Blankenbuehler, Broyles, Roop, Fleshman, Holt, Kirker, Reiner, Cook, Clore, Krigler, Moyer, Scheibele, Schluchter, Schmidt, Snyder, Thomas, Utz, Weber, Jaeger, Zimmerman, Carpenter. This is your second colony. Now, I've mentioned that I am a descendant. Who is my ancestor? Well, I had the distinct honor of having Spotswood make my 7 times great-grandfather the very first person he sued, Jacob Krigler. Jacob Krigler is my 7 times great-grandfather. He was about 17 when he came over. He was the very first person that Spotswood decided that he would sue. Again, we don't know why. The good news is that that was dismissed, and Jacob only paid the court fees. So we don't really know the history or story behind that. Now, where did the second colony head to? They would head to Madison County, the Robinson River Valley. By 1726, families began to patent land from the crown, and that ranged between 300 and 400 acres. They had a teacher there at the time that they ordained as a pastor, and they took this pastor and 2 other members of their congregation and sent them back to London to raise funds to build a new church. Well, again, when they were settled in London waiting for Tarbet to get out of debtor's prison, they began to worship at another Lutheran church, and by 1850, the title that would be given to them would have been Hebron. So by 1740, when everybody came back, they had Hebron Lutheran Church established. It is the oldest continuous Lutheran church in America, and you can see it today. If you've never been to Madison County, it is gorgeous out there. Lush, rolling green pastures. The cemetery, the first interment was in 1903. So for someone like me who wanted to go there and find some really early ancestors buried there, they are not there. I'm not really sure where Jacob is buried, unfortunately, but there are Kriglers, there are Clores, there are Blankenbakers, there are several headstones and several burials in that cemetery. Now, not to leave them out, there was an additional group of immigrants that came over in 1725, and I won't read them all, but you have Ayler, Baumgartner, Zimmerman, Hirsch, Deere, Settleman, Leathers, Razor, Racer, Danner, Tanner, Wilhite, Zeigler. And then the 1730s, these would have been some of the families that would have moved to the Little Fork area in northern Culpeper County. Back, Button, Kuntz, Fishback, Grimm, Heinbach, Huffman, Miller, Ney, Otterbeck, Rector, Wayman, White-Scarver, and Young. So we have all these families, and we know today that several of their descendants are all across the country and all across the world. We're very happy to say that we have a large contingency in Virginia. A lot of them also live in areas in the Midwest and the West Coast, including Indiana, Ohio, Illinois, Missouri, Texas, Oregon, Washington, California. So all but maybe 1 or 2 states really has a nice conglomerate of descendants from all these families. So now we're going to talk about present-day Germanna. How was it that we got started? What has been going on in the past? And what do we see ourselves doing in the future? So the origins of the Germanna Foundation. After World War II, descendants began gathering at the original site of the Germanna settlement, and by 1949 they had established the Society of Germanna Colonies with the help of a descendant named R. Broadus Martin. Now, by 1954, the president of the society was a man named Dr. Charles Huffman, and he wrote a letter to Siegen, Germany, offering a letter of reconciliation after one of the churches got bombed during World War II. Well, there was a woman who read this article, and she clipped it and sent it to her brother who was living in New York. His name was Ernst Flender, and he was a 20th century Siegen immigrant. And he read this article, and he would meet with Dr. Huffman, and they chatted. And by 1956, he will donate oil stock, and the Germanna Foundation, Memorial Colonies of Virginia, was established. So by 1969, the foundation had donated 100 of its original 270 acres to the Commonwealth of Virginia to establish a new community college. We know that today as Germanna Community College. So a lot of people who hear the name Germanna, they hear, oh, the college. Well, what came first, the chicken or the egg? What came first, the foundation or the college? So we didn't know, or they didn't know at the time, that that was the name that they were going to give the college, but as a, an honor and a thank you for donating the land, we became the Germanna Community College. Now, the mission for Germanna, besides preserving the heritage of the earliest organized settlements in Germany from 1714 and 1717, as well as those from 1730 and 1740, our mission includes land conservation, preservation of both material items and physical assets, education, and a strong international relation with our counterparts in Germany. So if you haven't been out to our visitor center, this is the Broadus Martin Fort Germanna Visitor Center. It was built in 2000. It has 5 sides, very much like the Fort Germanna that we were looking for. And it's also on the area where some of the original picnics were taking place. In fact, if you were to walk down one of the trails, you will see the original platform that the first picnics and reunions were taking place at. Now, if you were to go inside, and let's say you're a descendant, but you know nothing about your history, we have a nice genealogical library, we have archives, you can come in, you can sit down, and you can do as much research as you would like. Not only that, but we also have several books published called the Germanna Record. We have books about the second colony. We have books that mention first colony descendants, including the Jaegers. We also have a brand new book out that just came out this summer, the Wilhite family book. So that one's a brand new one to our edition. And you may notice some people on either side. On the far left, you might see Neil Patrick Harris. Well, if you like genealogy shows like Finding Your Roots, Neil Patrick Harris was on an episode, and he is a Germanna descendant. I believe he is a Hit descendant, if I'm not mistaken. And then over here with our foundation president, Mark Wheat, we have Buzz Aldrin. Buzz Aldrin is also a Germanna descendant. Now, if you decide to go out back and stroll around, you'll come across our memorial garden. We have placards and markers that talk about the heads of immigrant families from the first and second colonies, as well as stone pavers that are honored for people nowadays, or people could also honor their descendants or ancestors of folks that were in military. We still have several pavers out there that are blank, so you're still more than welcome to come by and purchase a paver in honor of somebody. We have our own Ziegen Forest and trails. We have 4 trails for you to walk. If you enjoy history, we have portions of Civil War remnants still hanging around in some of the areas. We have on our Orange Trail the Urquhart Cemetery. Dr. Charles Urquhart was the gentleman who pronounced John Wilkes Booth dead on April 26, 1865, so he has a bit of connection with us as well. And again, we have the platform that the first reunion and picnics were taking place on. So being in Virginia, we kind of border that Spotsylvania County, Orange, and Culpeper area. We have a hotbed of Civil War areas. Germanna Ford, May 4th of 1864, that is when Ulysses S. Grant would cross the Rappahannock River and make his way over into the Overland Campaign, thus chasing, if you will, Robert E. Lee down into the Petersburg and Richmond area. So I like to say not only do we have frontier history and early colonial American history, we have Civil War history. We're smack dab between 4 national park battlefields and 2 Civil War trust battlefields. Here we have historic Salubria. Now, the connection of Salubria to Germanna. Spotswood married a woman named Anne Butler Brain, but they called her Butler Brain, and she will actually be the widow of Spotswood by 1740 after his passing. She will marry a man named Reverend John Thompson, who will then build this gorgeous Georgian-style house around 1757. He will build it for her, essentially. Unfortunately, she will pass away about a year later, and so unfortunately she was not able to enjoy the house. Eventually the house will go to the James Hansborough family, and the Hansborough Ridge is part of the Stevensburg area, also a Civil War connection. Today it's not open for tours on a daily basis, but you're more than welcome to give us a call at the visitor center, 24 hours notice, and we can get you over there and get a nice tour of the house. So the house belonged at some point to the Grayson family. So in 2000, Leslie Grayson would donate the house to the foundation. And actually our caretaker, Lita, this house was part of her family. Leslie Grayson is a cousin of hers. And so because this house has been in her family for so long, when you go on a tour with her, I mean, you get anything. If you like architecture, she'll give you an architecture tour. If you like, the genealogy, social history, she can talk about the people. And actually, Salubria was affected by the 2011 earthquake. The chimneys actually kind of fell down. In the last couple years, they were able to get funding for it, and they're probably stronger than ever. But we still have a big preservation effort, as we would love to do more preservation on the house. This kind of shows you what it looks like on the inside. We have gorgeous cream-colored walls. We have fireplaces. They have archaeology in the attic. It's not, part of the tour right now, but we hope to have that as part of our tour one day. And we do have weddings and other events. So if you decide you want to have an event for your business, or you have someone getting married and they're looking for a great reception site, we can definitely do that for you. So probably one of our biggest projects and endeavors is archaeology at Fort Germanna Enchanted Castle. Now, archaeology has been going on and off for a number of years at the site, but it wasn't until 2013 that we acquired 62 acres of this land from Mary Washington University. So we're very happy about that. And from roughly 1995 until 2014, there was no archaeology going on. So we have our archaeologist, Dr. Eric Larson. He did his first archaeology program with interns last summer. So for the last 2 summers, we've had groups of interns come out. We've had field school students come out from Virginia Commonwealth University. And most of these photos are from this past year. This one is from last year when they were doing ground penetrating radar, trying to see if they can find any of the indentions and give us any hints on where things might be. Now, this beautiful photo was of a mystery trench. Again, we're trying to find the fort. They found this trench probably mid-season, and they thought it looked very interesting. And they kept digging, and they kept digging, and they kept digging. And this kind of shows you what they found. This is part of that trench, kind of that stain. They found artifacts. Unfortunately, the very last week of the season, they discovered it was not part of the actual fort. It was part of another building. It was like a septic tank or electrical line. But even though they didn't necessarily find it, well, that's a con. The pro is they can eliminate that from their search, because what they're planning on doing is they know that the fort is about 300 feet in length. So all 5 sides, yes. So for example, let's say you find what you think is the tippity top of the fort. Well, you have 4 other choices. Which way is it going to go? So once they determined where part of that fort is, they can then measure 300 feet in any direction and start doing test pits in that area. Now, I'm no archaeologist. If you have questions about it, I'll do my best to answer, but Dr. Larson's probably the one you'd want to chat with, and I can definitely get you in contact with him. But they have found artifacts. They have found old nails. They have found like door handles or something. They found maybe a musket ball. And the reason for that is because of this gorgeous house. Now, roughly by 1720, the fort becomes null and void. It is taken down. Spotswood then decides that he wants to build a magnificent house. So if you think of the governor's palace, if you've been to Williamsburg, essentially that is what this looked like. It had about 9 dependencies on it. And his friend William Byrd came for a visit, and he records in a diary that Spotswood has a marvelous enchanted castle. So that was not Spotswood's phrase, so that is the name of it. And so when they were doing archaeology on the home a number of years ago, they found an area that looked like it may have been associated with the fort, but they're not really sure. They don't have all the information. So based on this image, based on the fort, and also based on some brick foundation they found earlier this season, this is a rendering of what it may look like. So again, let's say they find this corner. Well, is it really this corner? Is it that corner? Is it that, or that? So it's kind of like a needle in a haystack. Archaeology helps us understand our history better, the social aspect of everything. One example I like to give locally is James Monroe's Highland. For a while, they interpreted that small, modest cottage as his home. And they've been doing archaeology there for a while, discovered a foundation, and found out that foundation was the actual house that he lived in, not that small cottage. So they had to completely redo their interpretation of the site. And so when you see this, you think of Jamestown Fort, English speaking, you think of the Spanish speaking St. Augustine. Here we have Fort Germanna in our backyard, just right down the road. How amazing will it be once we actually find it and are able to interpret the history and the lives of these settlers that came over 300 years ago? It's an exciting thought. So other Germanna activities, we do have a membership program, and I like to reiterate, you don't have to be a descendant to be a member. You can be anybody with an interest in history, preservation, German culture, early Virginia colonial history. Anybody is welcome. We encourage anybody to come by and visit us. And we also have the Germanna Dna Project. It's different than Ancestry DNA. We want to get as many people to give their DNA as possible, and you can match up to other cousins on a database. And maybe one day, once we find the fort, we know that there was a town that was built after it. We have Spotsylvania County. Germanna was Spotsylvania County's seat up until Spotsylvania and Orange became two different entities. So there are probably burials out there. Imagine if we found a burial and we could maybe identify DNA. One of our current descendants may be related to that person. We don't know. So the possibilities, again, are endless. And we also do trips to Germany. We do ancestral villages. If you're someone who descends from the second colony, they may try to go somewhere that was second colony related. Maybe you're from the first colony. And they also do trips down the river, the Rhine River. So if you're not really a descendant, that's okay. We get other options for everybody. And we also want to point out that we have the Germanna Foundation Annual Conference and Reunion coming up next July, July 12th to 15th of 2018. We usually have an Oktoberfest, so we have German food at Salubria. We have a conference with 4 or 5 speakers on different topics. We have a banquet and auction. It's a fun time. It really is a blast. I've been to 2. It's like a party, really is. Really is. And I want to conclude with something I found in our archives recently. Although it talks about more of the 1958 reunion, I think it bodes well for us today in modern times. So imagine you were at Germanna at a reunion, and this is an address by Mr. J.B. Carpenter Sr. And he says, again, I wish to say that I'm delighted to have you here, and I express the hope that you may be with us again and yet for succeeding reunions. Especially do I invite you to return next year so that you may check up on developments already planned for completion before we meet again. In the meantime, kindly let your friends know that they too will be heartily welcomed, whether or not they are descendants of Germanna colonists. Thank you.